J'espère que vous avez trouvé facilement la route, vous avez fait les flèches. Donc aujourd'hui, on accueille Richard Hyndman, qui est Android Developer Advocate chez Google, qui est basé à Londres normalement, mais là il est passé à Paris juste pour 2 jours. Donc on en profite pour faire une session. Et donc il va nous parler d'abord de l'Android Best Practice. Et ensuite, il va faire une session avec des live reviews d'applications. Merci à ceux qui ont proposé leurs applications sur GitHub. On va voir si on peut toutes les faire, mais ça m'étonnerait. Il y a eu beaucoup de demandes. Et il a quelque chose à vous montrer aussi au départ, donc je vais vous laisser en parler. Et si vous avez lu attentivement la description, donc les présentations seront en anglais, comme Richard parle français. So we'll switch to English, and thank you, Richard, for being here.
Thank you.
And
okay. I have no idea what Stefan just said. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. But it's a pleasure to be here in France today. Thank you all for turning up. I can't believe the turnout, considering this was only organised last week. Hopefully Stefan mentioned, my name is Richard, and I work for Google. I work for the Android team in London, and I just come here tonight because I'm working out of Paris, and I'd like to share some of the Android best practices with yourselves. So, who here has downloaded the Android SDK and started playing with it themselves? Fantastic. It's not called the Paris Android User Group for no reason. And how many apps have we got in the market? Who's got an app in the Android market at the moment? Oh, fantastic. I think that probably even outdoes the London Android User Group, which I go to quite often. So I guess we'll just get started then. Later on, you may have seen this at the front, later on I'll be passing this Android development kit around for people to see. We announced these at Google I/O this year, and I've got a little demo which powers this little Android from my phone, so you can control him. So who am I? I've only been at Google for about 6 months. Before that, I had my own company doing mobile services. But really, I'm a reformed mobile Java developer. I was doing mobile Java development for years and years until Android came along. And the day that Android started, I jumped on it, and I never looked back because I feel like it saved me. And I made a lot of apps for myself at the beginning. Maybe it was the way the Android community was, back with Android 1.0 and the T-Mobile G1, that you had to love Android to do Android. It was like Google do, they release early, and it was definitely released very early. So we were building applications that we wanted for ourselves, and then putting them in the Android market. So it was the first stopwatch. There wasn't a stopwatch in the Android market. So I made a stopwatch, and there wasn't a battery widget, so I made a battery widget, and just progressed from there until Android is pretty much everything that I do. So the Android figures, the latest Android figures, if I was here 2 weeks ago, you'd have seen these not bad numbers. 100 million devices, 500k activations a day. Activations growing very strongly, 4.5 billion installs from the market, and 200,000 apps in the market. But that was last week. This week, we're now at 135 million devices, 550,000 activations every single day, 6 billion app installs. That's a big number, from 4.5 billion in May to 6 billion now in July. 250,000 apps. 410 devices, 39 OEMs, 123 countries. And that's 123 countries that you can buy an Android phone in a shop. You can market your apps to paid apps 131 countries and free apps over 200 countries now. So we've come a long way, and thank you all for your part in that. So this talk is about best practices with Android. And why should you care about best practices? Best practices make your app look better, make it feel better. There's a subconscious reactions to applications that have slow elements in them, or aren't consistent throughout. You see different borders and margins and paddings throughout the application. It may not be something you pick up on instantly, but it's a perception of quality about the application. And you want your applications to be perceived as high quality, so you get better app rankings in the market, you get higher up the list, and eventually you make more money. That's what it's about in the end, right? You get more installs, more purchases, more in-app billing. So the first thing about best practices with Android is always just to make your app as pretty as you can. Make it beautiful. Work with a UI designer. They've been doing this stuff. They've looked at the Android best practices, which are all on developer.android.com, under best practices. And here's an example. So Rita Meyer. Hey.
Just a little question. Are we going to have the slides afterwards, or should we be scribbling notes like mad?
Where's Stefan? Is the video happening? I'll find out for you in a minute. I can't give the slide deck out, but apparently it may be getting video.
Okay.
Is the video happening? Okay, so no. You can access the slides afterwards, and it's not in video. I don't know if Stefan has a way of getting back in contact. You've got a blog. I can put some notes from the talk on the blog. On the
Actually,
blog.
we are recording the video, but we are not live streaming.
Okay, so there is a video.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get the video approved and we get it released on the blog later on. If not, instead of the video, I'll get some notes instead, and the slides and the links and other things put up. That's a good point. So this is Rita Meyer's earthquake application. You can see he just took the list view out of Android and the map view out of Android, and very simply just applied some data to it and made an application. The application doesn't look bad, and the application is very functional. But I just could do with a little bit of UI work on it. So he gave it to Roman Yorick, one of our UI designers in the Android team. And Roman just applied a couple of styles to it, just with some XML changes, hardly anything else. He just applied the action bar across the top, and on the list view down here, where Rita, you can't really see this because of the definition, but this is the timestamp string written out in it's like 9th of August, 2010, 12:31 UTC plus blah. Basically, it's hard for a human to process timestamps like that in a meaningful way. So Roman has cut them back here, so it says this happened 32 minutes ago. Let the computer do the hard work so that the human can just very easily comprehend the data. Hopefully you agree the one on the right looks better than the one on the left. He's added some tabs as well. And at the same time, whilst he was thinking about doing this, he did the tablet layout as well. So usually when we're upgrading apps from phones to tablets, you think about what views are already in the phone application and how you can apply that to the tablet application. Whether you can use all the views at one time, how you can augment the data. Here he's put the map and the list together, whereas before they were on two separate screens. And with the UI designer doing the work, it didn't take Rita very long to put the tablet version of the application together as well. A good example of good UI design is in the open source app that is the I/O Shed app. It was the app for Google I/O 2011. It's got the real-time updates are pulled in from this little button here, which are on the second screen. It pulls them into the home page. Just a nicer use of the space on the home page. And as you flow through the app, you can see where they've taken all the different views from the phone app and split them across the panes of the tablet. Either kind of 50-50 layout using weighting, or ones like these. Kind of tablet layout patterns. You've got to consider the landscape and the portrait and the music. Okay, for people who are doing Android, these hopefully are pretty standard things to do now. Make sure that you're using relative layouts. Match parents, weights, DP units. Make sure it works on all different screen sizes. Hopefully some of these things are forefront in your mind when you're developing for Android. And also provide the high density graphics, so that when people do run it on a tablet, it still looks nice, crisp, and sharp. So who knows what a 9-patch drawable is? Given the hands at the start, I'm hoping quite a lot of you. Any more? Anyone being shy? Okay. We're going to do 9-patch drawables quickly, because I think they're very important to Android development, and hopefully the people who've got their hands up will agree. I don't know how I talk into this thing with Android 9-patch drawables. But 9-patch drawables, 9-patch drawables in Android allow you to take any graphic and then define how the Android framework is going to scale that graphic for you. So in your Android SDK folder, there's a tools subfolder, and in there there's a little application called Draw 9-patch. And if you run it, you should get a UI, which looks like that. And you can drop any of your Android graphics into this UI. I've got a little B here. You just drop them in. and it shows you how the Android framework will scale your graphic in different situations. So the top right is if the graphic's stretched vertically. The next one down is if it's stretched horizontally. And the final one is an XY scale, which is the correct aspect ratio. So say, for example, you wanted to put this graphic in a menu bar. You wouldn't want the menu bar to be across and the graphic to look like this. It would look pretty ugly. So with a 9-patch drawable, you can just say, you can't really see it here. There you go. The framework has gone and put 1 pixel border around the outside of the picture, which you can just about see. And I can drop little markers in this border to say where I want the graphic to scale. So if I want his wings to scale outwards, I can say scale through this area and this area, and say the black bar down here. And instead, you can see if it was in a title bar at the top, his wings would scale outwards. Because it's this pixel strip here that's scaling and this pixel strip here that's scaling, instead of scaling the whole graphic. And then if you were going to scale it vertically, you'd see that there's the black bar here that would scale. And once you've done this to your graphic, you can just save it back into your drawables folder, and then this is how the graphic will scale from then on. So you can imagine that's very useful for various things inside your application, backgrounds to list views, things like that. Any elements where you're not quite sure how big it's going to be. Of course, the other thing you could do is just make the graphic a bit bigger and put the scaling items just here and here, and then it would just be the border of the graphic that scales, and the actual image will stay scaled down on the inside, which is very useful if you've got text inside your image and you don't want the text to get distorted. So that's a 9-patch graphic, and it was inside Android SDK tools for a 9-patch. The other things, if you are developing for tablets, if you're developing for tablets, I wonder if I can just make it bigger. You have to put a couple of extra things in your Android manifest. One thing that's nice to always put in your Android manifest is the install location of auto. If you don't know about that, it just means that the phone can decide whether the application is installed on the SD card or in the phone memory. The next one really is the target SDK version. If you put 11 in there, it's going to make quite a lot of differences when it's run on a tablet. Since the latest version of Android, Android 3.2, we now have a compatibility mode. And in there, you're going to get not only a little menu button in the bar at the bottom of the tablet, but also a scaling button. And the scaling button's there because we don't know if your application scales well on tablets, so we're now giving the user the choice to scale your application up. So they'll see kind of a phone rendering of the application scaled up to the full screen. And you really, if you put any effort into your application, you don't want that to happen. And just putting target SDK of 11 in there will mean that it doesn't happen. Okay, so the next best practice. The next best practice is be Android. Have a look at the best practices. Please don't port the UI over from any other frameworks applications straight to Android. It's one of our bugbears. Yeah, you know which one I'm talking about. Clearly. As soon as we see back buttons on applications in the top left corner, tabs along the bottom row. There's a reason we don't like tabs along the bottom row in Android. A lot of the handsets, like the Nexus S, and pretty much all of them, have touch-sensitive controls at the bottom. And these touch-sensitive controls are just an extension of the touch area of the screen. So if you've got tabs at the bottom of the screen, it's very easy to press the home button or the back button by mistake whilst we're trying to press the tabs. So there's a logical reason, but we prefer to have our tabs at the top of the screen. And then again, the lists and menus and buttons and sliders. There's a lot you can do with the default items in the Android SDK, and then just theming them. You can apply the styles like Roman did to the Earthquake app instead of writing your own list view. Being consistent, I mentioned before, if your application has standardized paddings and margins and fonts throughout, And we provide a framework for this using the resources folder, and now you can put dimensions and colors. If you use these things, your application is going to feel consistent to the user. So for example, don't hard-code colors. Put a background color in colors.xml. In the resources, you can just put a background color, and then wherever you need it, use the color background. That also means if you need to reskin your application at any time, you can just change the one color in colors.xml, and it will change across your whole application. The same can go for, say, cursor colors in text boxes or whatever it is. Extract them out into the colors.xml file, and it'll be more consistent. So this is the big one. This is one of the biggest ones on Android. It's very easy to write Android applications that appear janky or slow, or when you go through a list view, it kind of pauses and stutters. Whenever you see that, it's usually because someone's doing something processor intensive on the UI thread. The UI thread's the main thread of the application. When you go through the onCreate method of the Android application, that thread that does that is the UI thread, and we just want to keep it only for the UI. As it says, keep the UI thread for the UI. If you want to ping a URL, you want to do a SQL read or a SQL write, do it in a separate thread. Just leave the UI thread alone, so that's perfectly free for the highest priority, which is the responsive UI for the user. The next line is the examples of things that you can use to take things off the UI thread. The async tasks, the services, the threads and handlers, and the intent service are all things in Android that we use to keep the UI thread free and clean, and keep the application feeling very responsive. Strict mode, which is hard to read on here, is just a little hint. You can enable strict mode very easily in your onCreate. You just call this strict mode.setThreadPolicy detect disk reads and detect disk writes. And then if in any part of your application you do a disk read or you do a network call on the UI thread, the background of the application will flash red to you. It will warn you that you shouldn't be doing this, it's slowing your application down, and that you should be putting some kind of thread work around this particular call. The ones in the second half are for SQL specifically, just in case you're leaking any objects. The easiest thing, if you want to find out about this, is the strict mode policy builder. So I mentioned the async task. The async task is definitely the easiest way of getting something off the UI thread. Usually, if you're going to use threads yourself, you're going to have to create a thread, and then do some processing, and then use a handler to get the UI updated afterwards. Because the UI thread is the only thing that can update the UI, so if you're on a separate thread, you can't update the UI. That's awkward. Threads and handlers are slightly awkward. So async tasks take care of everything for you. They just have a couple of methods. The first one is do in background, and the second one is the update UI thread method. So as soon as it's finished doing its tasks in the background, it automatically publishes the results of the UI for you. One quick example is if you have a voting application. So maybe you have a choice of some items at the top, and then a vote button. If the user presses that vote button, and at that time in the onClick listener, you make a request to the web server to register the vote, that button won't return instantly, because you're going to call this new URL. This is all on the UI thread in the onClick listener. You may get an application not responding if it takes more than 5 seconds. Hopefully it's less than that, but it will still feel slow. So instead, you can just add these 2 lines to the top and bottom, which is creating an async task out of that request. This is a fully inline method, so you don't need to worry about creating separate classes. All you can do is say new async task. In the async task do in background method, you then do your URL connection, and then as that's created, you can just pull execute on it, and the HTTP call is going to happen in a separate thread and then return afterwards. So your vote button in your application will always respond instantly. If you want multiple voting, they can press it multiple times. It will just stack them up.
What about error handling?
What about?
if there's an error that happens during the async task.
Sure. So the same error handling that you would have to put around here, you'll have to put inside here. If you want the error to get propagated back to the screen, there's a second method you can override in here, which is the method which updates the UI, which I was talking about. So you can also put a second one in here, which if it fails, then you can put a toast or a log or cancel something else if you want. I did have a slide in here before this, which had a more detailed look into the async task, but I figured that this was the quickest win for everyone. If they can just at least do this, and then put their blocking code inside an async task, then it's going to just speed up the whole application and feel better. And then there's one more alternative, which is the intent service. It's another alternative for taking processing out of the UI thread. Interesting, the slides are in the wrong order. One last thing on the async task. Since Android 3.2, we're now multi-core aware. So we have a lot of devices which have more than one processor core in them. The Android operating system won't automatically make use of those cores in your application for you. It can put the garbage collection on the second core and some other things, but if you're running, say, multiple async tasks, it won't spread them across the cores. The reason for this is we did some testing, and we spoke to some developers, and it turned out that even though they were using separate threads, they expected the results of the async tasks to come back in serial order that they were called in. So we now give you the option, when you're executing an async task, if you add this one little static to the front, async task.threadPoolExecutor, then you let the Android system decide which core is the best core to run your task on at any time. Okay, so the intent service. The intent service is a bit like an async task, in the sense that it takes the processing away from the UI thread. If you've used services before, you know how to implement a service. It would be quite an awkward thing to implement an intent service like this, which you can just fire it requests, and it will queue the requests up and process them all separately, and then close itself down when it's finished. And then you can fire some more requests, and it will automatically start up again, process the requests, and shut itself down when it's finished. The intent service is a wrapper around services which enables you to do exactly that. So, say for example, you're listening for when someone takes a picture with the camera, and you then want to sync that picture with the cloud, with the internet. The intent service would be a great use for that. Whenever you notice a picture's been taken, you can just fire the intent off and say, synchronize this picture with the cloud. And then if they take another picture, you fire the intent off. You don't need to worry about whether some pictures are already being processed. You don't need to worry about other things the phone's up to. You can always just do this. And it is as simple as this. You just get this on-handle intent method where you do the work. And again, it handles the multiple threads for you. It means that you don't have to do any of the hard work with services or threads or handlers. So the intent service and the async task between them can just make your application just always responsive. Who uses stateless drawables? One hardcore guy in the middle of the room too. Okay, so one more element of making your application responsive is when you press a button on the screen, you want it to react to you. You want to give the user instant feedback. And a stateless drawable is a really good way of doing this. Instead of, on your, say, image view, instead of just pointing it to a picture, to a drawable, you can point it to an XML file. So you can have the source of an image view is an XML file that looks like this. And this just describes which image to show in any particular state. So this could be the home button at the top of the screen. And when it's selected, or when it's pressed, it will show the pressed version of the graphic. Otherwise, it's going to just show the standard version of the graphic. And using this, the Android framework figures out, it shows the home button, and as soon as the user presses it, it notices that state pressed is true, and it switches the graphic from this one to this one, and the user gets instant feedback straight away on that button press, without you having to write any code, without having to change any buttons around. Let's see if I can show you. Okay, so in the Internet Movie Database app, the little search button in the top corner, if I press it, it just switches to a second graphic. And when I let go again, it goes back to the little search icon. Press it. It goes back. And all that is a 2-line XML file and 2 pictures. And the framework does everything else for them. The same with the IMDb graphic. I think you get a highlighter around it. I'll show you an example of one of those in a minute when we have a look at it. The other thing is to be responsive to your users' needs as well. If any of you have looked into Google Analytics on Android, it's now a very complete package. It's a completely free and complete package. You can go to Google Analytics at analytics.google.com and sign up. And you get a jar file to include inside your Android application. And then you can just start making calls. So you can start the tracker, and then whenever someone presses a button or looks at a page view, presses the vote button, anything you want to do like that, you can just track the event. And then we bundle them all up, and when you call dispatch, we send them all back to the server. So maybe in the on-pause method of your application, you just call dispatch, and they all go back, and then you can instantly see them inside Google Analytics. So if you launch a new app, you can just watch the Google Analytics and see exactly which parts of your application are being used the most, how people are flowing through the application. It's or also you can catch exceptions and send them back to Google Analytics, so you can see which parts of your application are failing. You can't really see the side, but it is actually Google Analytics for the earthquake. And this is the refresh button at the top. It's been hit more times than anything else, on that views and other things. And if you want full details of that, you can just watch the video on the I/O 2011 sessions. Someone did a talk on it, and it was video. There's a lot of talks, if you haven't seen them already, on the from Google I/O this year. You can go to the I/O sessions and see talks on most of the Android features. Okay, this is probably my favorite thing in a minute. First of all, we had some updates last week. Updates to the Android developer kit. The SDK tools are now at revision 12, which is fantastic. I'll show you something quickly what that means. It means that in the UI editor, in the UI, you can now just drop layouts in, and if you want to drop an image in, you can now just drop it wherever you want inside the screen. Previously, this wasn't possible. You could just drop it, and then you have to go to the XML to figure out exactly where you want to place it. So if I just drop it there. Boom! That's a problem dropping into someone else's project. But it should create XML. The platform tools are at revision 6, that's just ADB really. The platform 3.2 is launched, which is now available on Motorola Zoom, and it basically just allows you to read from the SD card. It also has that as present scale. And more importantly, the Android compatibility package revision 3 was launched on Friday night. So there's one feature inside the Android compatibility package version 3 that I'm going to show you now, because it's awesome. It's a great feature, and people have been asking for it for a long time. If you're an Android developer, I guarantee you've been asked for this at some point. Views, or a set of views, which you can scroll horizontally between, and they just track your finger, like a gallery view, but much nicer. I'll show you an example here. So something like this, where you have multiple screens. There can be anything inside the activities. I know it looks a bit shanky on the screen, but over here it's and they scroll and they track your finger. People previously would have been asked to do this kind of thing, and they'd have done it. Yeah, I hope that's right. Should there be a capital M? Maybe. Previously, if you were asked to do this as an Android developer, you'd probably start by getting a gallery, and then putting views inside the gallery that it was never even made for, and then someone would flick it, and it would flick 20 screens off to the left, so then you'd start playing with the acceleration of it, and it was horrible. But this one here now should take about 5 minutes to make this kind of view up. Although I'm only 1 minute. So we go for a new Android project. Can you see this on the screen? Yeah. We're going to call it awesome feature. Okay, it's going to name Okay, so for those who haven't seen one before, this is the structure of an Android project. And when I was talking about the resources before, we have these values files and that's where the dimensions and the colors and things go to. We have layout files, which define the screens, and then we have the source up here. So this new compatibility library that was released on Friday, you get it from the Android SDK in the manager. And it's called Compatibility Library Version 3. And once you've got it, you get a library which you can choose on your project. And in the build path, just add an external jar in. And it sits in Android SDK, Extras, Android Compatibility V4. And if you add that into your project, you're going to be able to create view pages. Create one here, a view page, and we'll do that so this is the great new class which enables you to create fully scrolling views, multiple fully scrolling views next to each other in minutes. So we're going to stick one in the layout. Our awesome pager activity. This is the standard Hello World app, so it's got the text in there. We want to just make it full screen. And we'll give it an ID so that we can find it from the code. Awesome pager. Okay. Right, so in the code, we can now as you would with any other element, grab it out of the layer. So that's just finding the awesome page element from inside the layout and bringing it into the code. The second part of the pager, I'll explain this separately. If you used list views or gallery views before, you'll know that you use a base adapter with them. The base adapter provides all the data into the list view and into the gallery view. The advantage of this is that when you have a list and you scroll through it quickly and the items go off the top, the list view takes the items that have gone off the top and it gives them back to you to recycle to put into the bottom. So you're saving memory. You only have, say, 10 items on the screen, plus a couple at the top and bottom. And as you flick through the view, the rest go off the top, and get back to you, you recycle and put them in the bottom, and you've only actually got 14, maybe 15 views open at one time, saving you a lot of memory, and it's all handled by the framework. The workspace that we open sourced from the Google I/O shared application didn't use this. In the workspace application, You have to have all your activities instantiated at one time, and it can take a lot of memory whilst you're swiping between them. This view pager that now is included in the compatibility package uses a pager adapter. So it's back to the original model where you can swipe, you could have 1,000 views all next to each other, and as you're swiping through them, as they come off the left of the screen, the framework will recycle them and give them back to you to put back onto the right-hand side of the screen. So you can have an unlimited list, or even a circular list, if you want, you can put them back in again, of views inside the awesome pager. The other thing is this V4 here, Android.support.v4, is a reference to the API level that this package supports. So you can use the view pager on Android 1.6 and above, and the compatibility library is fully tested and compatible with all of those. Okay, so we need a pager adapter to pass these in. Eclipse is going to tell me that I need to stop out somewhere. Out of all these methods, you only need to really worry about 3 of them. I'll move this one. Okay. So we've got the get count method, and that's just going to return the number of views that's in our list of views. So I'm just going to put number of views. So we're going to return 20 views. Instantiate item is called whenever the view needs a new item. So this here. This here is just saying, I need the view that goes in position, and you have to fill this in to return it. So in our case, we're just going to return a text view. You could inflate something far more elaborate. We're going to set the text. I'm cheating, I'm looking at the screen now. Command. Position. Color. Practically writes itself. Text size. One thing about instantiate item, and it's mentioned in the documentation for it, is the reason why it passes you the collection in, is that it's up to the developer to add the view in to the view stack yourself. So I have to add the view. At the start. The reason that the text view there isn't compiling, anyone know? Context. Always in Android, isn't it? You always need a flipping context. So I could create a constructor and pass one through, but I'm going to cheat because it's. Okay. Always a context. And then you return it. So that is now creating a view which is going to go on the page stack, and you're going to be able to scroll through it. When you destroy it, so again, that's what's going to be the position view. It's up to the user to take it, the developer to take it back up the stack again. finally, because it's doing the layout for you, it needs to know which views are children of which other views. It's a slightly strange thing. There's another class which wraps this up, which makes it a little bit easier to use. But for example, if you had a relative layout and you put a text view inside it, it's just asking to know that your text view is inside that layout. So in my case, I've only got text views, so it's always just going to be okay. So we've got our adapter. Apply it onto okay. Please be on. Which one?
Down.
Name.
Collection.
All right, so to make it a little bit prettier, and using the Android Development Tools version 12, and that is one of those features, you can now browse through themes and styles on here. This is the Android manifest where you define all your activities and what they'll look like. But now I can say Android theme equals Android style / and everything's fully browsable now. I just want to take away the title bar at the top, so I'll do theme. Previously, you had to remember these things. Oh, and one more thing. I'll set the background color of the application here. To be hash A4C6. This is the beautiful Android green color. You'll see if you go to A4C639.com on the back of your t-shirt, all these things. Android Java. Oh no. If you could own a color, you would. Okay, so we've got a background on the screen, we have a view pager. In here, we've pulled out the awesome pager from the view and set the awesome pager adapter to provide its layouts. There's going to be 20 of them. I'm saying this because I'm checking it, because if it doesn't run the first time, I'll just. We have the text views, it's a text. Contour. Just so you know, I'm not showing you this application yet. The text is going to be wide. Okay, enough. I shall try running it. And hopefully we end up with. Come on. Bonjour, Paris Group. And as we scroll it, you've got the scroll. Yeah. So compared to what this used to be, this used to be at least a day or two's work to do something that's scrolling on Android. And now, okay, it took slightly longer than 5 minutes. Maybe I was looking at this late.
What applications? You can show the live.
Okay. This is Android Screencast. Is there a help button somewhere? Nope. But it's an open source project on Google Code. It's probably just Android Screencast on Google Code.
Mais c'est fait de la vidéo, ça permet de faire les voix.
You'll find it. Okay. And this is what sounds good. So if you're up to date, and you'll know about the view pager, and you'll be able to charge for 2 days' work when it only takes you 5 minutes to do it. Because nobody knows about this yet. It only came out on Friday. That's what we just did. An example of this was in the IO lab before. Just trying to explain as we scroll through some things. Okay, being thoughtful. You can be thoughtful to your users. Yeah.
Is there documentation for all the new classes you see available in the
Yes. The documentation for the compatibility package says run Java doc at the moment, unfortunately. So it is all commented, and there's some very good samples. There's a very good sample in there of the view pager. There's another one of the view pager which uses fragments in every single view. So each view can have its own activity and its own layout, and it's a really nice example. So there is sample code, and there is Java doc, but there's nothing online yet. I know. No, this is from 1.6. This is all backwards compatible to Android 1.6 and any screen size. So data backup. This came in API level 8, but not many people are using it yet. It's a nice little feature, which is wrapped up by something called the Shared Preferences Backup Helper. And if you use the Shared Preferences Backup Helper, you can just pass it a preferences file inside your application, and that preferences file will automatically be synchronized with the Android servers. And that means, say I've got Angry Birds on my phone, and they're using this, then when I install it on my tablet, my progress is automatically downloaded with the application. All the shared preferences come down with the application whenever you install it from the market. So it's just a really nice way of keeping consistency for your users. It does require an API key, but it's a completely free service. And the shared preferences backup helper makes it very, very easy to use. If you want to use it for other data types, SQL databases, things like that, you can do. You can use it for binary blobs, but it's a bit harder to use. Whereas this one class is a very, very quick win if you're using shared preferences. One other thing is just to be accessible. Accessibility on Android is a big thing for us at the moment. It always has been. We've included more and more accessibility inside the framework. So it's nice if you see devices with scroll wheels and D-pads. If you support them, then that's often the way that people with impaired sight are going to navigate through your application. Also, in the settings of Android, you can enable talkback mode. And talkback mode will read out what's on the screen to a user. And you can tell talkback mode what to say by filling in content description. So inside the layout, where you have a text view, for example, or an input box, you can fill in Android content description, put what you want it to say in there. If you use a string from the strings XML file, then you can localize it to any language as well. And then as the user is using the application, it will say input field email address in it just makes your application accessible to more users. Finally, I think this is probably the last slide. Just some hints for getting your app better rankings in the Android market. And the first hint is obvious: build a great app. People say, how do I get my app featured? Or how do I get my app up the rankings in the market? How do I do better? Just build a better app. It's amazing how much good rankings and a little bit of marketing can do for an application. Feel free to update your app as often as possible. If you're getting feedback from the market, you can just keep updating it. We like that, especially if we see people responding to the feedback the users are giving them. If your application uses any specific hardware, whether it's GPS or screen sizes or sensors, things like this, make sure you list in the manifest what it's using. Because if it gets installed on a device that doesn't have these things, you're going to get bad feedback. Whereas if you say in the manifest that you need a sensor, then we won't show it in the market to that device. These are called uses features, and they're part of the SDK if you go into the manifest. And finally, the featuring image. You'll see we've got the Android market on the internet now, on the web. And if you go there, we have a carousel at the top. And in there, there's some really nice kind of 1000 pixel by 500 pixel graphics. If we're going to choose your application for featuring in that section, that graphic, just to make sure it has no adverts in it, because if it does, it won't go in. No screenshots. make it eye-catching, and you can put the branding and the app name in there as well. There's a lot of examples if you go to the market page for all these things. So that's what we just went through. I don't know how long that took me, 40 minutes. Be beautiful, be Android, really. Not just in your application, just be Android. Wear green shirts. A46639. Be consistent throughout your UI. Really, don't guess at paddings and layouts, just extract them into other files and keep them consistent. Be responsive. Make sure you just never do anything on the UI thread. That's what you want. Keep up to date, because sometimes we put things in the framework which makes it easy for you. That's interesting. That was out of a previous deck. Be thoughtful, be accessible, and be brand. That's the end of that. So if anyone's got any questions, you can